just another group of people who make just 0.2% of the population. We should get, 0.2% of the attention.
Anti-Semitism is like written into the DNA of human civilization.
But forget about any religious interpretation.
God chose the Jews. It doesn't even matter. God chose the Jews.
Maybe you're chosen, meaning you have a certain role, certain function.
Are they just a circumstantial, historical phenomenon?
Is there a solution to human hatred of one group against another group?
Professor of Jewish Studies at Dartmouth, Senior Research Fellow at Shalom Hartman of North America.
What is the Jew's unique role in society?
Professor Shaul Magid, please join us.
The Jew saw them all, beat them all, and is now what he always was. All things are mortal but the Jew. All other forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality?
I don't think I really did experience anti-Semitism growing up. I mean, I certainly was an identifiable Jew, and I mean, there were perhaps comments made about the fact that I was a Jew, but I don't know if I would really call that anti-Semitism. I mean, I think that similar types of comments were made about the black students and Irish students and Hispanic students and Greek students. I don't think there's any specific. I don't think there's any particularity to anything that was said about me as a Jew. But I would have to say, by and large, no. I will have an interesting caveat. I lived for a number of years as a Haredi Jew in Jerusalem, and if I experienced anti-Semitism, it really was basically walking around dressed as a Haredi Jew and some of the things that were said to me by secular Israelis.
Was that in the 80s? When was that?
It was in the 80s, yeah.
Yeah, that's when they were burning bus stops with ladies in bikinis on them.
Right. It was
cars.
Also most of the Haredi Jews at that time were living in kind of enclaves. I think now the proliferation of Haredi Jewry in Jerusalem is such that people are living in all kinds of neighborhoods, so people are used to seeing them much more. But yeah, in those days, I mean, I experienced what I would call a kind of internal anti-Semitism by secular Israeli, high school students towards me as a Hasidic Jew.
What was their? You're definitely I feel in touch with the emotions of what's going on.
Yeah.
What did they hate about you or seeing? Not you, but what did they hate about seeing religious guys?
Oh, I think that there's a real. Again, it may be less now than it was in the 80s, but there was a real animus against the Haredi Jews by secular Israelis.
But I mean, you, a guy, grew up in New York, experienced a lot of things. Now you're there. All they see is the outside. But what do they have against you?
Oh, I just represented for them people that don't go to the army, people that are not Zionist, people that are not really a part of Israeli society and Israeli culture.
People that are stoning cars if they drive on Shabbat through their street.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's probably what those high school kids really were thinking about. I just think they just see there was an otherness to the Hasidic Jew that they made fun of. They made fun of their speaking Yiddish. It's standard just high school kids doing what high school kids do. I don't think it was very.
Leo and I have this thing through the first section of our podcast where we go through this book about the unity of the Jewish people and disunity of the Jewish people, that we categorize your street level anti-Semite with your really, what do we call them, your class A anti-Semites,
right.
Like there's a Henry Ford, and then there's a guy on the street who's just spray painting something he doesn't really understand. Right. So it sounds like these might just be your street level anti-Semites.
They're that, there's a sociologist from the U.S. from the 70s named Earl Rabin. He defined the categories a little different. He says there's folk anti-Semitism, and there's social anti-Semitism, and then there's political anti-Semitism. And those three categories are very different. So folk anti-Semitism is just people that hold negative stereotypes about Jews. They might hold negative stereotypes about blacks.
Right. It could be anyone.
Right. But if you said to the folk anti-Semite, do you think that Jews shouldn't be allowed to do X, Y, or Z. Like they would say, no, of course not. I mean, this is America. Everyone has to be treated equally. But there's a certain kind of just, certain kinds of attitudes and stereotypes and bigotry that people have about other people. But they don't think that it should be translated into some kind of political realm, like Jews shouldn't be allowed in universities or Jews shouldn't be allowed to do that. And basically said that doesn't constitute anti-Semitism as a problem. Right? It only becomes a problem when it enters into the sphere of the political. I think that's a good entry point because the term itself has become so ubiquitous at this point and so overwrought and so I don't know what the word would mean. I mean, there's an entire industry that's developed called by some scholars as the anti-Semitism industry, and one of the problems with the anti-Semitism industry is that it doesn't really make a lot of distinctions. So, as you said,
does it provide any solutions?
That's a good question.
Because, like the anti-cancer industry, for example. Sorry for cutting you off.
Yeah.
If there's no cancer, all those guys are out of business. It's a huge business.
Right.
I'm sorry, and just another example. There was a great book called Black No More. Have you heard about that book? It's like taking place in the 30s, and apparently some doctor manages to change skin color to make you look white. And then the biggest objection was from all these movements, the black movements that were calling for equal rights and all that. They were suddenly losing their funding and everything. So they're going again. It's a great book, by the way. It's an interesting.
I think that's a good question. I think that they're part of the things that I've been thinking about and writing about is what one might call the teleology of the anti-Semitism movement. That's, what does it seek to achieve? What's the end goal? Is the end goal the eradication of anti-Semitism, which really seems pretty futile? I mean, it's just like saying, oh yeah, we want to eradicate racism in America. I mean, that's not really a realistic goal. Is it more about simply managing anti-Semitism? That was something that someone like Meir Kahane talked about, right? I mean, he was basically saying, no, you can't eradicate anti-Semitism. All you can do is manage it. All you can do is make it you could make it, the anti-Semite will pay if he or she acts in an anti-Semitic manner of threatening, the physical safety of Jews. But there's really no eradication of it. I don't think it's really so clear what the anti-Semitism movement is really, what its ultimate goal is. On the one hand, it's trying to expose anti-Semitism. It's trying to define it, and that's what the whole IHRA document, right, and the Jerusalem document, I mean, that's what it's all about. It's very interesting that the anti-Semitism or the anti-Semitism movement has really focused much more of late on definitions, which is kind of strange. Like, why do we need to define it? That we kind of all know what it is, right? Like it's kind of like the pornography question, right? I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. But I think that the definitional move is important because the goal of the definitional move is really to make the connection between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. That's the elephant in the room. Right. That's what's really... And
then connect that to legislation. That's what they're trying to do.
That's what's really it's very interesting. That's really where the anxiety is. The anxiety is not so much that there are people like the person, who attacked the Pittsburgh synagogue or Poway or Colleyville, because in a certain sense, those are exceptional cases. Right. I think the real anxiety is in the systemic anti-Zionism or anti-Israelism, however you want to understand it, and to think about what does that mean if it's not anti-Semitism, and what does it mean if it is. And I think that's where a lot of the writing about anti-Semitism is really being focused now. It's really, in a certain sense, the Israel question that is at the front. Back in Europe, it was the Jewish question in terms of, well, can Jews really assimilate into European society after emancipation? Can there be, or are they unassimilable, right? That's the Jewish question. And the Israel question now is really about, what does it mean to be opposed to a Jewish state? What does it mean to be opposed to a state that's engaging in policies that the left considers to be war crimes or apartheid, or whatever. And so how does the Jewish community respond to that? And I think that's where the real anxiety lies.
Leo and I have this interesting. Oh, go ahead, Leo.
Okay, keep that. I just want to just leverage it even further and even tie it to the little anti-Semitic sentiment you experienced back in Jerusalem, to the fact that so many of the anti-Israel movements and even some of the BDS organizations, they are filled with Jews. You find Jews in those ranks themselves. So we ourselves are not clear on the place of Israel, the importance of Israel, the reason for Israel. One of our guests said, when we asked her about Israel, we're like, should Jews move to Israel? Would that solve anti-Semitism? And she's like, I don't think we deserve Israel. A lot of us just don't see the value. It's our fault. We don't even deserve it. That was her answer.
Interesting, yeah.
And
if you go back, if you're old like me, and you go back to the 70s, right? Israel was always the thing that actually held American Jewry together. That was the consensus, right? That was the consensus.
Right.
Basically, if you wanted to give a sermon in a synagogue and you didn't want to be controversial, you talked about Israel. And now it's just the opposite. Now, you can't talk about Israel from the pulpit anymore. And Israel is, in a certain sense, that which is really tearing American Jewry apart. And in a certain sense, the anti-Semitism or the anti-anti-Semitism is a way of trying to in a sense bring that a close ranks where if you're going to say that somebody was anti-Zionist or anti-Israel is anti-Semitic, then you're basically weaponizing the term, and one of the products of that will be there'll be a consensus among Jews, because there's a consensus among Jews about anti-Semitism. Nobody is in favor of anti-Semitism, right? So among the Jews. So if you basically say that anti-Zionism or criticism of Israel is anti-Semitism, in a certain sense, you're trying to bridge that divide, which is really.
But the funny thing is, and I've studied it extensively. When I came back, I was part of a extensive certification program. It was like 300 hours with some of the best. Really, the best minds on anti-Semitism in the Arab world and in the West.
What was the program called?
The New Anti-Semitism.
Yes, right. Well, I want to talk about that in a moment, but go ahead.
Yeah. They brought in Professor Patterson from Texas. They brought in Smalls. They brought in all kinds of interesting people and some people from the intelligence community in Israel. Like, it was really eye-opening. I mean, it was one of those moments where we're like, oh shit, we are in way more trouble than we were even thinking. When you like listen to all those people analyze the situation, and when you and many of them said the same thing, which is kind of like what you said. When you hear someone talk about Israel and it's anti-Semitic, it's very clear. When you hear about someone just trying to make some comments about how the government is conducting itself or certain military tactics, that sort of thing, it's also relatively clear. But there are some gray areas, and I think they make them the minority. So to me, it's not such a debatable question. I think a lot of people who speak against Israel are really speaking, in anti-Semitism. They speak the language of anti-Semitism. They don't mean anything else other than that. It's just an easier way to talk about it. It's just a new narrative, right? So to me, So to me, it's simply an extension of the same thing. As you said, there was, 100 years ago was the Jewish question. Now it's the Israeli question. And in 50 years, if we don't do anything, it will be the whatever the concentration camp will all be in on some island. It will be the question of that place. It'll just upgrade itself. Because, again, it goes to the heart of what we really feel strongly about, that this is not some coincidental thing. This is not some random, the world is picking on one group. The world could have picked on any other one group. There are many small groups. Some of them are really easy to pick on, by the way. The Jews, they make a very special case, and they've been at the heart of that case for thousands of years. This makes no sense. I mean, it's so random that it just cannot be random. You know what I mean? That's what we're trying to.
So this then really gets to I think for me, one of the main points, and you're right, the notion of the new anti-Semitism, which is really a book that came out in the 1970s.
Right.
And the new anti-Semitism was trying to make the case even then that that the criticism of Israel is another form. It's a new anti-Semitism, right? It's another form from the Jewish question. Israel question, Erwin Cutler famously said that, Israel is now the new collective Jew, globally the new collective Jew.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I actually disagree with that strongly, and we probably don't have the time to go into it. But I do want to say one thing that I think is important, and that is part of the confusion about this whole conversation is anti-Semitism historically conditioned? Is it circumstantial, or is it in some way what's kind of known as the eternalist argument, that in a certain sense anti-Semitism is something that is transhistorical, that it's not about certain situations, it's not about certain consequences, it's something. Now that's a very I would say dangerous and also problematic argument to make. I know that David Patterson makes that, and I know that a lot of other people make it too. But two things come out of that. First of all, it's not provable or falsifiable.
Right.
What is not provable or falsifiable?
That there's just that anti-Semitism is just eternal and not historical.
So we need like 2 hours with you then.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. But this is very important, right? Because a lot of the writing on anti-Semitism is historical writing. But it seems like underneath the historical writing is, you're really making an eternalist argument, but you're actually trying to cover it on history, because if you make the eternalist argument that anti-Semitism is like written into the DNA of human civilization or whatever that means.
So hold on. Speak for 1 sec. So Shaul, so what are the Jewish people? Are they just a circumstantial, historical phenomenon, or is there some eternality about this specific, tiny, annoying group that every empire has had to contend with, yet is still here? And I'm not talking about the guys who that any of them or almost any of them have a clue about it, but maybe we can talk about what they might.
I mean, for me, and I'm sure a lot of the other people that you'll have on the show, and maybe a lot of listeners disagree, the Jews are just a people. There are people that developed a very powerful and a very strong myth of origins that sees them, that views themselves as the center of human civilization. They're not the only people that have done that. Other people have done that too, and to some degree, before the advent of Christianity, during the times of the Jerusalem temples, from the perspective of like the Roman Empire, the Jews were just a nominal backwater people. Jerusalem was just like it was. The
other side of the coin is, if the Jews are just a people like any other people, then anti-Semitism, of course, cannot be eternal. It's just another
form of hate.
It's just it goes along with that group of people.
Right. It's another.
That's the end of it.
Hate, right. And you could say that, certainly Christians were treated much more harshly among the Roman Empire than the Jews were in the early period, right?
There's no monopoly on being persecuted.
Right. So I think, it's the Christians who were martyred for being Christians.
Correct.
The Jews were just living their ancestral norms.
That's true. But the question is, why, if that's the case, why are Jews getting so much disproportionate attention to the size of the people? If we're just another group of people who make just 0.2% of the population, we should get 0.2% of the attention. But so what about that anomaly? What about
I think to some degree, and I say this again, this would need much more time to unpack. The answer to that question is Christianity. That Christianity becomes the empire that's built on a supersessionist ideology that the Jews have no place, because they are the new covenant, right? So it's like they're taking the covenantal myth of origins of the Jews, they're taking it away from the Jews and placing it on themselves, that the Jews were once chosen and then they were unchosen, and now the new chosen people, or the new chosen group, are Christians. And supersessionism is really the struggle.
We had a problem with the Egyptians long before the Christians.
Yeah, but a lot of people had a problem with Egypt. In other words, I think that the Jews were persecuted before Christianity, like other people were persecuted. There was nothing
Right.
particularly special about that. And you even see that in the Hebrew Bible, right? One of the interesting things about the Hebrew Bible, certainly the Pentateuch, is that there's no sense that the Jews are uniquely oppressed or persecuted. They're
No.
persecuted, they're enslaved like other peoples. They come.
So what is unique though? What is unique that we were monkeys at some point a couple 100,000 years ago, and that some group, for whatever reason, develops and it's made up of, it's not just one ethnic group. It's made up of, Abraham's group was a big group from a lot of people in a metropolitan area, Babylon, there. They had this new idea, which was new to humanity, which another group, I mean, maybe had the concept, but this group developed and brought and practiced something that was new and revolutionary to humanity, which was this love the other as yourself, or to be like one. That's when they received the Torah. They had to be as one in order to receive that kind of that revelation. All the other groups, from my understanding, one guy received the revelation, one prophet, one person, but there they became a nation as one. So maybe you can't say, maybe it's beyond the scope of what we're talking about now when we say eternal. Eternal is a very long time, but at least we can start from there and say that's something super unique, and maybe that super, and everything in this world, night and day, up and down, plus and minus, has the other side to it. So maybe against that kind of unity that they had as a group there at Sinai, for example, where it began, anti-Semitism, it travels along with it.
It's very interesting. There's an obscure midrash, not so obscure actually, but it's in an early medieval midrash that etymologically connects the term Sinai, which is Sinai,
With hate.
to their Sina, and basically the midrash says you will be hated because of this event. Meaning that part of the covenant in this midrashic, I'm not making a historical claim here, right? In this midrashic claim, it's saying that you are getting the Torah, the result of which is that you will be hated. That is endemic to the covenantal experience. Now, that's an interesting psychological, take in the midrashic's imagination of how he or they understood this kind of animus against the Jews. But let's separate that from, which is really a psychological rendering of the Jews to themselves about others. And, I think we have to be careful to make a distinction between telling the story of the Jews from scripture and telling the story of the Israelites Jews as we can from history outside of scripture. Because scripture is a reflection on how the Jews see themselves and their place in the world. How they were seen by others is a whole different story, right? Scripture doesn't talk about that, right? There's only one place in the entire Torah, the entire Pentateuch, where we have any notion of how others, outsiders, viewed Israel, and that's the story of Bilam.
Well, we have the Megillat Esther, which talks a little bit about the attitude of a nation where they lived in, right, as foreigners, and that
no. That's what I said. The Pentateuch. I'm just saying until the books of Moses.
right.
So I mean, later on, during the Israelite kingdoms, you certainly see that. But again, even within that, the animus, the hatred, the conquering of the Israelites throughout that ancient history doesn't seem to be uniquely against the Jews. I mean, people were conquering people all over the place. People just,
I guess
I guess that's what I want to say is that internal to the biblical history, I think it's easier to come to some kind of unique state of who the Jews are and what their role is in society. But when you
say what is that then? Tell us what is the Jews' unique role in society?
I don't, in some way, even though the idea of one God probably exists among certain pharaohs in Egypt before that we have some historical, record of, it was somehow concretized among the Israelites. They have a story of God meeting them in the desert.
So in super, because I'm not an academic, in super clear terms, a person, like the regular person on the street can understand, what is it that we did?
we somehow were able to conceptualize and popularize the notion of one God,
Which means what?
which means that there's a creator of the universe who is involved in
It
creation,
created a lot of problems,
created
apparently.
a lot of problems, and in the biblical account chose this one people to carry that message. And that was that was its myth of origins. It was a very powerful myth. It was such a powerful myth that it was adopted by others within that community that then moved outside, became Christians, Muslims. I mean, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, it's really the same story.
Right.
Right? And they're just different iterations of that story. And, Muhammad is coming to basically correct the ways in which the Jews distorted scripture. Christianity is coming to basically fulfill the promises of scripture. So in a certain sense, we may have, the Jews may have started something, but the survival of the Jews, or the popularity of the Jews, or the problem of the Jews is in a certain sense because others adopted it by and large to their own
We can't do anything about what happened.
Right.
So what are
Right.
you going to do now?
Okay, so again, the question is what we call anti-Semitism, or what people like David Nierenberg called anti-Judaism, and making the distinction between those things, is there a solution to that problem? I kind of don't think so. I mean, is there a solution to human hatred of one group against another group? And
We
the
think
answer-
there is, by the way.
What? Well,
think there is.
Marx thought there was too. That was what the communists.
Right. But he got it all wrong,
And if only they let him fulfill that.
Right?
Hey, by the way, we think that the fact that people started to write about it from the time of Marx onward, because you don't see that happening in the first 1500, 16, 1700 years, right? Since, let's say, in the Common Era. But suddenly, in the last few hundred years, humanity collectively, you could say, started to give birth to this possibility, right? So you have people writing about it, right? We live in a collective field of information,
So-
of ideas, of desires, right? So
right,
Marx
so then
writes about it. Yes, it gets twisted. Then you have other people, the communists try to do it. It gets twisted. There's clearly kinks in the software, but maybe there is a general progression. I guess what
Well,
we're trying to, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I think one of the things that Marx suggested, which is a very powerful thesis, is that the way to eradicate hatred of one group against another is basically just erase the differences.
Right, and that was a mistake that he made, because
We're all
if you
different.
erase the differences, that's like saying to nature, no, we don't need, three of a kind. Let's just make them all one thing. Clearly,
Okay, so right.
No,
So the Enlightenment comes along and says, "Oh no, we can't do that." Or the Emancipation says, "We have to create models of tolerance." Right, which would
that was their idea.
eradicate
That
to
also
a-
failed, but that also failed.
Okay, so I'm saying, so there are all of these things that are coming up. Now, in a certain sense, it failed and didn't fail because the American experiment, to some degree, is really an experiment built on tolerance, tolerance of the other, religious
and-
freedom, right?
but it's-
No, it is though. I mean, for white people, for sure, right? Not for people of color, but for white people, because the question of anti-blackness is a different question. I get
Okay.
that.
The point I'm getting at is, I think it's like everything in nature seems to have a trajectory, seems to be leading somewhere, right? Stuff starts as one thing, goes through a certain evolution, and ends up as another thing. The only place where it's hard for us to see such a trajectory is in ourselves, because we're in it, right? It's like we're stuck in ourselves. It's hard for us to see where we're going because we're in ourselves. If you could somehow take a step and look at it from above, maybe you would see something. We argue that maybe among the Jews, and not only among the Jews, among other cultures as well, other traditions, other systems, there were individuals who were able to rise a little bit above that level of existence, call it the egoistic level of existence, and we're able to look down and say, okay, this is moving in this way, and you're still stuck in here and here and here. You're trying to put like little band-aids on this. Oh, let's erase the differences. No, that's not going to work. Let's just be tolerant. Okay, that's not going to work. Let's just sue everyone who's not being tolerant. No, let's just we're trying different things. Seems like we're not there yet, but it seems like maybe there is a method, perhaps a way to reach that state of love that is being talked about in many places. It's almost like it's in the collective subconscious, but we're not able to get to it. And somehow with the Jews, it's the one group of people whose name implies unity, Yehudi, Yichud. It's implied, it's in the name. It's the people who gathered around Abraham, around the idea of love of the other. And then the one line in the Bible, right, out of this whole Pentateuch, right, love your friend as yourself, one line. Kind of suspicious, if it's one, it's probably very important, right? It's not many times.
I think though, I mean, I hear you. I think that Judaism, or the Jews, I'll call it, say Judaism, has one problem in reaching that particular thing, in that it is making a claim of hierarchical prioritization, that God chose the Jews. God chose the Jews. It doesn't even matter. God chose the Jews.
But forget about any religious interpretation.
No. But let me finish. God, just in terms of its raw, naked,
right.
God chose the Jews to the exclusion of others, right? So there's one God. God created the heaven and the earth. God created all of humanity. And then God comes and says to Abraham and his progeny and Moses and the Jews in the desert, I choose you.
Right.
Now we can talk about interpretations throughout history and how that's understood. That's all, and that's all fine. But that one point, that's why that midrash is actually so insightful, because the midrash is saying, you are chosen, therefore you will be hated. And it seems as it's an incredibly honest appraisal of things.
Very honest, of course.
Right? So it's something that Judaism has not.
So everyone hates us because we have a book that says in our book that somebody says that we're special in our own book. That's why they hate us.
No, and we believe that book is truth. And we believe that book is truth. You need that second part, right?
Okay, so someone gave us a book, and in that book it says we're special, and we believe it. So therefore, everyone else hates us. That's what you're saying?
It's the way in which the favorite child, is resented by the other children. It's a psychological thing. Once you say that the God of heaven and earth chooses you and not me, or chooses you and not anybody else, I mean, there's a kind of natural psychological.
Okay.
I'm not saying this to just. I'm not. We're living in the world of myth, right? I understand. I'm not saying that to justify. I think it's more. If we want to talk about contemporary issues, we really have to talk about the question of supersessionism in Christianity and the role that has. Not that the Jew is hated as they were in Egypt, because other people were hated also. It's that the Jew is uniquely hated. Right, that's the supersessionist argument, because the existence of the Jew in early Christianity or medieval Christianity, the very existence of the Jew problematizes the Christian claim of redemption.
True, but we could just say that let's just wait it out until the Muslims realize that the Christians stand in their way, and they'll duke it out. The problem is that our book also says that they're going to all turn back to us again. That it's not so. We can't just sit it out. Somehow it seems like if we were so insignificant in the system of nature, I'm not talking not on the level of myth, on the level of a system of nature, looking at humanity and the world like human body and the cells and organs in it, right? It's a fair comparison. So we have all these different parts running around doing things that, to the naked eye may look random, but when you start to take it apart, you see that, everything is connected and interdependent and influences each other. And maybe there are some different things that some parts need to do for other parts to work. And when before you learn about it, it looks just one bag, right, with everything inside and it's all working. But when you open it up, you see that there's a lot of, right, specific differentiation. What we're saying is maybe that being chosen is not, you're so special now, goodbye. No, maybe you're chosen, meaning you have a certain role, certain function that every other function is conditioned upon it. So it's simply a matter of serving that function, and by that you allow the rest of the functions to develop. It's like hormones that the body needs in order to hit puberty. If those hormones are not released, very tiny amount, right? Yeah. If they don't get released, the body doesn't hit puberty. Everybody's angry, right? Yeah. So that's kind of our question. Could it be that nature did not eliminate Jews? Again, speaking in terms of natural systems, right? If something is redundant, it gets rid. The body gets rid of it. Nature gets rid of it. If Jews stayed for so long, and it is quite long. I mean, not in human, Earth evolution, no, but in human evolution, it's pretty long. If we stayed for so long, maybe there is a reason. So we're asking, what is that reason? Could it be tied to that unique hatred? Right. Could people hate us because somehow, subconsciously, even irrationally, they think, oh my God, these people have something to do with my good future?
Right.
That's what we're
Yeah,
asking.
very interesting. Isaac Bashevis Singer has an article on Yiddish as the language of exile, and he makes this argument that if the Jerusalem temple had not been destroyed, if the Jews had not been dispersed, that they probably would have disappeared like many other tribes that didn't. It's the dispersion that was the security of their survival, right? That
Or
if
that the
they had
anti-Semitism that
remained.
actually keeps them together, because without it,
Exactly. So,
Right.
so a lot of people said, "Oh, what's unique about the Jews? This isn't like in the 19th century. Is precisely that they represent a people who survived without territory and therefore without politics. And it's the politics and territory that creates the context and conditions for war in which peoples were destroyed." So that in a sense, what this argument makes, that's the special nature of the Jew and the lesson of the Jew. What ends up happening is that because of pogroms, because ultimately of the Holocaust, but even before, a lot of Jews basically just got tired of that. And they just said, like, no, we want to be a normal people like everybody else. We want to have a land. We want to have a language. We want to have a country.
But here's the catch: you can't be normal people like everyone. You see in history, every time we try to be like normal, eventually they get to us. We find ourselves with our backs against the wall. As our guest Jonathan Safran Foyer from Australia said, his rabbi told him, the Jews that converted to Christianity were the last ones on the trains. So we can't even do that. So we can't not assimilate. We can't assimilate.
Right.
Something is up, Professor. What is up?
Yeah, I hear you. Again, I think that it's, I don't know, precarious, it would be the right word, to try to make claims of uniqueness.
I agree, but so let me ask you. So if you had all the resources at your disposal, how would you address anti-Semitism? Or what would you tell all the Jews? Like, how would you? I'm curious. Okay, so I hear you say it's precarious. I think that it's inevitable. But let's say we go with your way. What would you do? You have all the resources. You have a big, internet connection. You're streaming live to all the Jews in the world. What are you telling them? What are we doing wrong? What did we not get right?
That's a big question. I think we got a lot of things right, and I think we got a lot of things wrong. And I think that the history of who we are, where we are, how we came to be who we are, and where we are in 2020 is, a fascinating history that has to be looked at from somewhat of an objective perspective. But I'm not answering your question. I think it's very funny because academics are really trained not to answer those kinds of questions, right? Or not to have answers to those kinds of questions, but really to try to nuance the question itself. I think that I would say as one thing, we have to seriously consider rethinking and not reinterpreting, rethinking the whole notion of chosenness.
Okay, in what way?
I don't think it really works anymore. I don't think it really functions. I don't think it's really productive.
has anyone actually fulfilled it?
Yes, well, Mordechai Kaplan basically said, we have to get rid of divine election. We have to get rid of chosenness. In other words, what he was saying within his...
Because we first have to figure out what is it, and did anyone do it yet?
Right.
Because
well, Kaplan was saying that Jews could never survive and thrive in a democracy. He was writing in early 20th century America. They could never thrive in a democracy and still maintain the fact that they're chosen. Now, he was wrong in a sense, because Jews have survived in a democracy and have maintained the chosenness, but he was basically saying that the notion of divine election served a certain purpose at a certain time. And
I would say that nobody really figured that out yet. What is it? What is this chosenness? I don't think that it's some kind of kid who thinks that he's great because his dad gave him a lot of stuff. We have a pretty radical view of what's going on here, and I feel like we need we really need to have you back, and I would love to be able to open this up, because I can tell you're just, I feel like your motor's just getting hot, and like I have stuff I want to open up, and we just kind of like
that's what happened last time. That's what happened last time, but it's still.
Yeah, look, I would love to come back. These are really important questions and really sensitive ones, and I think that they're too easily flattened out in trying to come up with solutions. And I think it's important on the question of anti-Semitism and in this larger conversation, let's not think about things in a solution-based way. Let's first just kind of like, let's grapple with the issues. And because if solution is always in the horizon, it pushes us too quickly. People will say, well, a two-state solution, not two-state solution. Well, what's a better option? Well, that's always what people, what's a better option? That's not right. Don't push the solution to the front, right? First, basically just try to analyze the problem and then think. So I'd be happy to come back.
Great.
Excellent.
Thank
you. What would be, just between now and until you come back, what would be your just heartfelt wish for the Jewish people?
Well, I think that we should keep our heads pointed in the right direction and live the lives that we have without the backdrop that everyone's going to hate us anyway. Right? Because I think that is an excuse to act in immoral ways and justify them by saying it doesn't really matter what we do. So why should we be moral if they're going to hate us if we're moral? They're going to hate us if we're immoral. So we just look out for our own interests. I think we should have our sight set at becoming more a part of the world community. And that would be true in terms of ourselves as individuals, as collective, and I think in terms of Judaism as well. We have a repository of wisdom that we can share with the world, and we should begin to really do that.
That's a good place to start next time.
Yeah.
Nice. I think next time we will start with that repository of wisdom and also segue into network science.
Okay.
So get ready. Professor Magid, Shaul.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming. It was great. Thank you for your patience and your open. I always love your openness. It's a rare in the academia, so I really appreciate it. And this is the Jew Function. Like us, follow us on the Jew Function hashtag and address on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, the website, everywhere. It's all the Jew Function. If you want to come on the show, let us know, and hopefully we'll get together to the root of anti-Semitism and to the solution to it. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Great to see you. Bye.